25-year-old former nurse Guo Shuang was being led away to be executed for her part in the intentional homicide of a senior doctor at the hospital she was previously employed. Along the way, she was stopped by a documentary crew who'd interviewed her about her case just hours earlier. The solemn look on her face wasn't only because of the fate that she knew awaited her, but that of her now 20-year-old boyfriend, who'd been convicted of the same crime.
你刚才是问什么？问王子健了吗？为什么第一反应要问他的结果？不知道。就像你昨天说的，希望他能留下来。你如愿了，他留下来了。真的。
The reporter informed her they'd just received news that the young man's execution had been suspended for 2 years, and he wasn't going to die today. A slight smile broke out on the condemned woman's face, before she let loose tears that were a mix of sadness and relief. Guo Shuang had long since accepted her punishment, but throughout their trial, had pleaded for the court to show leniency to her boyfriend. She then apologized to her parents for what she'd done, before being taken away to receive her punishment. Her final message to her boyfriend was that she hoped he lived well. Just a few years earlier in 2005, Guo Shuang graduated from the Henan Workers' Medical College with a nursing qualification. She then had to choose between going on to university to further her studies or look for an internship, gaining better qualifications on the job. Ultimately, the young woman from a poor rural background in a village on the outskirts of Zhengzhou, the provincial capital of Henan province, decided her family would struggle to pay the university tuition fees, and so chose to find an intern position. It was a decision that would introduce her to a man named Feng Weizhao, and eventually lead her to a cell on death row. Born in 1983, the then 22-year-old Guo Shuang applied for nursing positions in numerous hospitals around Zhengzhou, excited to start her career. She was the first in her family to do well enough in her education to get into college, and her farmer parents were immensely proud that their daughter wanted to be a nurse. After several rejections, she got called back to attend a follow-up interview at the Zhengzhou First Affiliated Hospital of Zhengzhou University. Sitting in on her interview that day was the head of the Human Resources Department, who was also a highly respected surgeon specializing in hepatobiliary surgery, which deals with the liver, bile ducts, and pancreas. Feng Weizhao was one of the senior surgeons at the hospital, and was held in especially high regard as he'd completed his postdoctoral studies at Columbia University in the USA. While she failed to get a position in the nursing department, Guo Shuang was offered a job in the personnel department and would be working directly under Feng Weizhao, effectively becoming his personal assistant. The opportunity wasn't exactly what Guo Shuang wanted, but she knew that working for one of the hospital's top men could only be beneficial for her career prospects if she performed her duties well. She signed a contract as a temporary worker, determined to impress her new boss. Early in the evening of September 30, 2006, the discovery of a body lying by the side of a road in Zhengzhou was reported to police. The male victim had a scalpel buried into his chest, and also suffered blunt force trauma to the head, as well as severe injuries to his throat and wrist. Searching the body, police found his wallet still in his pocket, any cash and bank cards untouched, along with the victim's ID card. The body was identified as Dr. Feng Weizhao. Having found his wallet left undisturbed, his jewelry and expensive watch still on the body, police's original suspicions that this was a robbery dissipated. However, the body was found in a parking lot in a fairly quiet area of the city, which would have required transportation to reach, and there was no sign of any vehicle that brought the doctor to the scene of his death. There would soon be reports of the discovery of a car set alight and left to burn in another area of the city, and it was quickly identified as the doctor's car. Interviewing hospital staff, investigators discovered that Feng Weizhao had left work at around 5 in the afternoon, along with a former employee of the hospital named Guo Shuang. Witnesses stated that the pair had gotten into a loud argument in the doctor's office, before leaving together once the shouting match calmed down. With her possibly being the last person to see the doctor alive, and the argument that took place, police set about tracking her down. Using employee records, they got her ID number, and soon found out that she'd bought 2 train tickets destined for the province of Xinjiang, some 3,000 kilometers away on the other side of the country. Fortunately for police, they were able to get to Guo Shuang and the person using the second ticket at the station before they boarded the train. She was arrested with 18-year-old Wang Zijian, and the suspects were taken in for questioning. Despite only having eyewitness testimony of an argument between Guo Shuang and Feng Weizhao, both suspects being interviewed separately confessed to ending the life of the doctor. However, the confessions didn't do much to help police clear up exactly what had happened. Both Guo Shuang and Wang Zijian claimed they were solely responsible for taking the doctor's life, and absolved the other of any blame. Both gave different versions of how the doctor received his fatal injuries, with both claiming responsibility for causing them. With neither suspect deviating from their story, police began pushing harder for a motive. In an attempt to figure out who was telling the truth, they began to focus more on Guo Shuang, who had the closer relationship to Feng Weizhao. She slowly began to open up about her relationship with the doctor, and what she claimed led to her ending his life. Guo Shuang didn't have the usual secretarial skills that would be required for a person given the position of a PA, but she did what she could to please her boss. Her lack of experience caused her to often make mistakes in the early days of her employment, but she found that Feng Weizhao was unexpectedly kind and patient with her as a boss. When she made errors, rather than getting angry and admonishing her for incompetence, he'd show understanding and encouragement, which wasn't typical of those in senior positions. Guo Shuang felt she found the perfect mentor, someone who could help her learn how the hospital worked, and would eventually recommend her for a nursing position if she impressed. Like Guo Shuang, he was a native of Henan, and originally graduated from a vocational school before going on to further his study at Tongji University in Shanghai. He then moved to America with his wife and child, to further his expertise at Columbia University. However, he decided he wanted to return to China, while his wife had grown comfortable with her life in the States. Unable to come to some sort of agreement, the couple eventually divorced, and the marriage broke up amicably. With his qualifications, experience, and having attended a prestigious university overseas, he was offered positions at numerous hospitals, but chose to return to his home province and took the position offered at the Zhengzhou, first affiliated hospital of Zhengzhou University. He was an impressive figure for a woman like Guo Shuang, who grew up poor in a tiny village, whose parents struggled to afford her tuition fees. His kind, compassionate attitude towards her only made her think even more highly of the doctor. In the February of 2006, shortly after the Spring Festival, the 40th birthday of Feng Weizhao was approaching. Guo Shuang was surprised that she received an invitation. The party would be attended by all upper management and senior doctors of the hospital, along with other long-term employees of the Human Resources Department. Guo Shuang was the only temporary employee asked to attend. The party began with a large meal at one of the better restaurants in the city, and would eventually move on to a karaoke bar. While social events, especially those related to work, are supposed to be fun, a time when colleagues can let their hair down with each other, they also have a certain etiquette attendees should adhere to. Part of this etiquette is the concept of mianzi, which translates to face. In Chinese culture, it is expected that people keep face, or are seen to give it to others. It is especially important for individuals not to make others lose face, even more so when it comes to those further up the hierarchy. For example, when in a social situation where alcohol is involved, it is important for attendees to remember rules like standing up and holding your glass in two hands when the host is refilling your drink, and touching glasses when toasting with more senior people either in terms of age or position. The toastee should always place their glass a little lower. Then there is the culture of drinking at social events in China and the toast, ganbei. The term ganbei is equivalent to cheers in English, however it literally translates to dry glass, so it effectively means down in one. When ganbei is spoken in a toast, it is expected that all participants, whether it is the entire table, room or smaller groups toasting, finish their drink ready for a refill. To refuse could be a major social faux pas, and to not ganbei with someone in a senior position is seen as making that person lose face, and it will be noticed. For those unused to drinking, or have little tolerance for alcohol, celebrations can swiftly become a very unenjoyable experience. It is extremely common for people to drink much more than they can handle, disappear to the toilets to vomit, then force themselves to return and continue drinking. Guo Shuang was introduced to this style of drinking at the birthday party. Being around people much senior to her, she wanted to impress, and quickly became very drunk. In efforts to continue to give the higher-ups face, her boss Feng Weizhao in particular, she tried to keep up and continued to drink, until she eventually passed out in the karaoke room. As the party died down, and people began to leave, Guo Shuang was still in a state of alcohol-induced unconsciousness, but Feng Weizhao assured the other attendees he'd personally make sure she got home safely. The following morning Guo Shuang woke. Any hangover she was feeling quickly vanished when she realized she was naked in a strange bed in an unfamiliar room. The pain she felt, and spots of blood on the sheets made it clear to her what had happened after she passed out. In the recent past, and to some extent today, Chinese men with a more traditional mindset expect, if not outright demand, that their future wife be a virgin on their wedding day. Being unmarried, Guo Shuang had remained chaste for any potential future husband, but now that had been taken from her. She broke down in tears, and got up to collect her clothes. As she dressed, Feng Weizhao walked in from the bathroom naked. The smile on his face faded when he saw his subordinate in tears. He immediately blamed the alcohol he'd consumed the night before, and the way Guo Shuang was dressed, saying he thought she was trying to seduce him, and he just couldn't resist. A near-hysterical Guo Shuang didn't want to hear his excuses for violating her. While she was somewhat innocent and naive, she knew what he'd done was wrong, and told him she was going to call the police. Feng Weizhao sat her down on the bed and tried to comfort her, telling her he was a responsible person, and that he'd make sure to do the responsible thing. He added that being a man of influence at the hospital, he could help with her future career prospects. Guo Shuang calmed and went through the possibilities in her mind. She was just a poor village girl, accusing a highly educated, respected doctor of violating her. She was drunk the night before, so doubted anyone would believe her. Feng Weizhao had always been kind to her prior to this, giving her a job she had no qualifications for, and was now offering to be responsible for her, meaning he'd marry her, and could help her get a permanent contract, which would make a big difference in her being able to support her parents financially. She chose to believe him and decided against reporting the incident to the police. The two entered into a relationship, albeit one that had to remain clandestine. Feng Weizhao claiming that it wouldn't do for their relationship to become common knowledge around the hospital. But over time, Guo Shuang began to feel as if she was being used. There was rarely talk of marriage from Feng Weizhao, and when she brought it up, he'd only give her vague answers in response. Furthermore, he told her as the relationship was secret, she couldn't live with him and they couldn't go out in public together. The only time they spent in each other's company privately was when he wanted to sleep with her. But it would be in August of 2006, Guo Shuang truly began to feel that she was being taken advantage of. The hospital was looking to recruit 150 new nurses. Some would be what is referred to as regular workers, while others would be contract workers. A position of regular worker is often called 铁饭碗, which translates to iron rice bowl. Essentially, it means a job for life, with much better benefits than other employees. Competition for these positions is fierce, as they offer much better salaries and job security. Guo Shuang was expecting to be one of those picked out to be made a regular worker, but soon found out that while getting a nursing position, it was only as a contract worker, so she confronted Feng Weizhao. He tried to reassure her that it was only a matter of time before she'd be made a regular worker, and asked her to be a little more patient with him, as he couldn't be seen to be playing favorites. Guo Shuang chose to listen once again, just as she did the morning after she was violated. But the feeling she was being taken advantage of grew, and she was increasingly unhappy with the situation. Drinking had become a way for her to deal with her unhappiness, and after the latest argument, she went out to a bar, and here she'd meet 18-year-old Wang Zijian. Like Guo Shuang, Wang Zijian came from a poor family growing up in a rural area. However, while the parents of Guo Shuang had done everything they could to give her a good upbringing and education, the parents of Wang Zijian were violent, neglectful people. The regular beatings dished out by his parents didn't exactly make him the perfect son. He hung around with petty criminals and got into fights so often he'd carry a knife with him to school, mostly for his own protection. However, despite former classmates saying he was a bad student, he still did well enough to gain admission into high school, something which young people with his kind of upbringing rarely achieved, most dropping out of education after middle school. He even harbored ambitions to get into a university. He claimed himself that he was never a top student, but he always maintained average grades. He just frequently struggled to focus in class. On meeting Guo Shuang, the young man instantly felt an attraction to the older woman, and she felt the same. While she now believed Feng Weizhao was just using her to fulfill his own desires, Wang Zijian was kind and attentive, and clearly had genuine feelings for her. With him still being a student, the relationship developed slowly. They usually communicated online, using the social media app QQ, but they'd spend more time with each other physically, as the relationship developed. Wang Zijian didn't know about the other relationship she was having with Feng Weizhao, but he always had a sense that something happened to her in the past that was making her unhappy. It wasn't long before the relationship between Feng Weizhao and Guo Shuang reached a breaking point. She again asked when he would make her a regular worker. Finally, he admitted that despite being head of the Human Resources Department, he never had the power to make that decision. Only the people higher up the management chain could. Angered by this, Guo Shuang asked if everything he'd promised her was a lie, including the idea of any possible future marriage. Feng Weizhao responded by saying it was ridiculous to believe he could ever marry a woman like her. He was successful and highly educated. There was never any possibility that a man such as himself could marry a village girl with farmer parents. Months after he'd violated her, then used her, lied to her, and strung her along with excuses, the truth infuriated Guo Shuang. She gave him an ultimatum: either get her the position he'd promised or she'd expose what he did to her. Unsurprisingly, she was fired days later. Only being a contract worker, the hospital could terminate her employment at any time with little reason. She left and met with Wang Zijian. He saw immediately that something was very wrong, and she finally told him everything. The young infatuated man, filled with rage, and told her he would end the life of Feng Weizhao to make her happy. On September 30, 2006, Guo Shuang went to the hospital for one final confrontation with Feng Weizhao. Prior to this, Guo Shuang and Wang Zijian prepared a medical scalpel and hammer. Guo Shuang called Feng Weizhao from outside the hospital asking him to come out and speak to her, but he refused. Undeterred, Guo Shuang entered the hospital and marched to her former boss's office. The meeting between the two quickly became loud and heated. Hospital staff began congregating around the office doorway, eavesdropping on the argument. Seeing the crowd gathering and concerned that Guo Shuang would say something that could damage his reputation, he took her outside to continue the conversation, away from other staff. They went to his car where Wang Zijian was waiting. Feng Weizhao questioned who the young man was, Guo Shuang replying he was her cousin and was only there to protect her. She told Feng Weizhao they should go to somewhere more private to talk, and the doctor agreed. Guo Shuang insisted on driving to the location and the trio got in the car. Feng Weizhao sitting in the passenger seat, Wang Zijian sat behind him. They drove to a secluded parking lot not far from the hospital, and the attack took place. With Guo Shuang and Wang Zijian both claiming responsibility for the injuries inflicted on Feng Weizhao, it is difficult to know who did what in the car. Police tried to piece together what happened from the autopsy report on the injuries sustained by the doctor. Once the car came to a stop, someone sliced the throat of Feng Weizhao with a scalpel. As he was sat behind the doctor, police felt that Wang Zijian was the person responsible. The injury caused blood from Feng Weizhao to spray onto the windshield of the car. Then someone sliced open his wrist. As she was sat next to him, police believed that this was most likely done by Guo Shuang. Even without his medical knowledge, Feng Weizhao would have known he was seriously injured, so he fought back, and managing to get out of the car, attempted to run away. Once outside the car, he received the blows to the head, from what police now knew to be a hammer. They suspected that this was the work of Wang Zijian, given how forceful the blows were. The injuries he'd already suffered were guaranteed to have caused his death without medical treatment, but the scalpel penetrating his chest made sure of it. This injury was more difficult to assign to either Guo Shuang or Wang Zijian, both being in a position to inflict it. The couple then left the body on the ground and took the car. At some point they changed clothes they'd prepared before the attack, then set the vehicle alight, burning the clothes they were wearing in the assault, before heading to the train station to make their escape. The evidence of the injuries suggested to police that both Guo Shuang and Wang Zijian had taken an active part in the death of Feng Weizhao, and so both were charged with intentional homicide. The pair went on trial on August 2, 2007. The near-year-long delay for the trial was due to police investigating the confession Guo Shuang gave about her relationship with Feng Weizhao. At the trial she was sentenced to death for intentional homicide. She begged the court to show leniency towards Wang Zijian, claiming it was entirely her fault the young man got involved in the situation. She stated that he was still immature, and had become so enamored with her that he was prepared to do anything she asked, so she was able to manipulate him into helping exact her revenge on Feng Weizhao. Wang Zijian, for his part, maintained that he was responsible for the death of Feng Weizhao, and that Guo Shuang didn't inflict any injuries on the doctor. He added that he had no regrets, was in control of his own actions, and was fully aware of the potential consequences. The judge also found him guilty of intentional homicide, but his sentence wasn't announced in court. This was largely due to his age. Had he been 17 at the time of the crime, he'd be considered as a minor, and therefore not eligible to receive the death sentence. Wang Zijian had only turned 18 in the April of 2006, just 5 months prior to the incident, and was still a high school student at the time. Both factors would be taken into account when handing him the final sentence, along with the claims of Guo Shuang that she manipulated him. In December 2008 the case was brought to the wider public's attention when it was featured on the TV series Infatuated, which translates to interviews before execution. The show, hosted by journalist Ding Yu, as the title suggests, interviewed people sentenced to death, in some cases just hours before the punishment was carried out. It showed dramatic reenactments of the crimes, along with sit-down interviews with the perpetrators, where they would explain what led to their actions. Both Guo Shuang and Wang Zijian would be interviewed on the show, giving them a chance to tell their stories. And it would be on the show Guo Shuang would find out the fate that awaited Wang Zijian as she was being led away to be executed. She was informed by Ding Yu that Wang Zijian was sentenced to death, but it would be suspended for 2 years, meaning that if he showed good behavior while incarcerated, and commitment to his rehabilitation, then the punishment could be commuted to a life sentence. On December 21, 2008, Guo Shuang was executed for the intentional homicide of Feng Weizhao. The story of Guo Shuang and Wang Zijian is often portrayed as a romantic tale. The death row lovers so infatuated with each other that one begged for the life of the other to be spared. However, the reality is a little different. Wang Zijian was barely 18 and still a high school student when the two met and started a relationship. He was a vulnerable young man, abused and neglected by his parents. Guo Shuang admitted that she'd manipulated him, and knew she could have told him not to do anything to Feng Weizhao, but chose not to. Her pleading for his life to be spared came more from the guilt she felt for bringing him into the situation, and essentially ending his life before it had a chance to begin. While it is difficult to find any up-to-date information on the fate of Wang Zijian, since there hasn't been any public notification of his execution, it's safe to assume his sentence was commuted to life in prison, and one day he may be released. Guo Shuang fell victim to what many women in the Chinese workplace have had to suffer through in the past, and something that is still an issue for women today. Men in senior positions taking advantage of the power they have to fulfill their desires. In the past, women would generally suffer in silence, like Guo Shuang, often thinking people wouldn't believe them if they reported it, or have people think they were probably asking for it, and trying to further their career prospects. And unlike Guo Shuang, who eventually had a violent and deadly reaction to what she went through, countless other women would suffer in silence. It was almost expected that men in senior positions would take advantage of their female subordinates, and was considered as an unspoken rule of the workplace. The issue would often be hand-waved as just a part of traditional culture, wherein the ancient past emperors of China, or any wealthy powerful men, would have numerous concubines to satisfy them. In more modern times, this changed to female employees submitting to men in senior positions, with the threat of losing their jobs or being held back in their careers if they resisted. The problem being especially prevalent in schools and hospitals. Although it is still an issue today, since the Me Too movement, women are now much more likely to speak out against it, and in 2019, new harsher laws were introduced to help combat the issue. When people look at the Guo Shuang case with a modern eye, many believe that while she needed to be punished for her actions, the sentence was harsh given the circumstances around them, and if it happened today, she very likely wouldn't be executed. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please consider leaving a comment, giving it a like and subscribing to the channel. And hope to see you again for the next dark tale from the Middle Kingdom.